Good afternoon, Prynhawn Da. It's a pleasure to be here, sitting in for Sue. It's quite extraordinary to think that COP26 was only 5 months ago. So much has changed. When the world's attention was focused on Glasgow and the UK government was trying to secure international action on coal, cars, cash and trees. So much has changed since then in terms of marine energy policy, and we have a fantastic panel this afternoon to run through some of those changes, given a real sort of full breadth of experience. So we have on the panel Grace Millman, Energy Analyst at Regen, Max Muir, Senior Policy Analyst Advisor at Ocean Energy at Bays, Jim Scopes, Project Director, Local Partnerships Marine Energy Programme, Jessica Campbell, Senior Strategic Consents Manager at the Crown Estate, and Eileen Linklater, External Relationships Manager at EMEC. And I'm from the Marine Energy Council. We are the representative body for wave and tidal stream energy. We have over 50 members, and I think what's really exciting at the moment for the sector is how strongly aligned we are with the UK government's priorities. If you think about levelling up, net zero, global Britain, it's fantastic to see in the Levelling Up white paper, tidal stream highlighted as having significant employment opportunities across the UK. In terms of net zero, the UK is blessed to have a tremendous resource in terms of marine energy. We just have to think about how we can create the policy environment that helps the industry harness that. And in terms of global Britain, we have the opportunity to access a market that's forecast to be worth £76 billion by 2050. The most significant change since COP26 has been the war in Ukraine, which has completely changed the debate around energy security in Europe. So we have all of that to go through in a fantastic panel. So we're going to start with Grace, setting the scene for some of those changes that I've run through and changes since post-COP26.
Perfect, thank you. I'll move over here for a moment. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Richard for the lovely introduction. So, as mentioned, my name is Grace Millman, and I'm an energy analyst at Regen. For those of you who don't know Regen, we are a team of net zero experts whose mission is to transform the energy system for a zero carbon future. We have a long history working in marine renewable energy, having been heavily involved in the design of Wave Hub. At Regen, I lead on our offshore renewables portfolio of work alongside my colleague Johnny Gowdy, and I'm currently leading a piece of work looking at the supply chain opportunities for floating offshore wind for the southwest. It's really lovely to be here today, and it's nice to be back with Marine Energy Wales and Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum, whose placement can be attributed with getting me into the renewables sector. I'm delighted to take part in this panel today, and I want to recognise the excellent work of Marine Energy Wales in putting on a gender-balanced event today. Now, I don't know whether it's just because I follow a lot of people at the conference today on LinkedIn, but it seems like every day there are new announcements and changes in marine energy, from changes in policy to projects being granted seabed leases, and increasingly more people being employed in the sector. So I think it's fair to say you've all been really busy over the last few years doing all of that. Over the course of this session, we will attempt to answer the question, has COP26 delivered for our sector? And more importantly, look to the future to ask, what's next? COP26 was a crucially important milestone in the UK's and the world's journey to net zero. And it was the first real test of the mechanism from the Paris Agreement. Analysts are now suggesting that the nationally determined contributions agreed upon in COP will limit warming to 2.4 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, still not enough to prevent the most dangerous effects of climate change. As Alex Sharma stated, we can now say with credibility that we have kept 1.5 degrees alive, but its pulse is weak and it will only survive if we keep our promises and translate these commitments into rapid action. Now the world needs confidence that we can and will implement the pledges made in Glasgow and further these to deliver net zero in a just and inclusive way. In the 6 months following COP, a lot has changed in marine energy policy, with newer, more ambitious announcements being made every week, which does make it really difficult when you're making a presentation about those changes, but I will try my best. In the lead up to COP26, the UK government published its net zero strategy, outlining a target of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, including a sub-target of 1 gigawatt of floating offshore wind. Since then, the Committee on Climate Change has gone even further, identifying the need for 50 to 55 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, to be in line with the commitments made at COP. At a Welsh Government level, emerging offshore renewables are recognised as a key part of the green recovery and decarbonisation agenda, and various supportive policies have been put in place, as we heard from the Deputy Minister for Climate Change earlier today. At the beginning of November 2021, the Crown Estate announced its ambition to unlock 4 gigawatts of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea through a leasing round which could see seabed rights awarded in 2023. This announcement came soon after COP26 and was well received by industry, developers and stakeholders, with at least 16 development organisations announcing projects for the Celtic Sea, including many of the organisations that are exhibiting at the conference today. More recently, in February 2022, the ScotWind leasing round saw exceptional levels of interest, with over 70 bids into the auction. The round awarded seabed rights to 25 gigawatts of offshore wind projects, including 15 gigawatts of floating offshore wind projects. With an initial aim of 10 gigawatts, I think it's fair to say that ScotWind was a success. Now, the Scottish Government has already committed to further ScotWind leasing rounds in the future, and with significant levels of interest in the Celtic Sea already, it looks like the 2020s are set to be formative for this emerging technology. One of the most exciting announcements came very soon after COP, when BEIS announced the funding for allocation round 4 of the Contracts for Difference scheme, in which tidal stream projects have been awarded a £20 million ring-fence minima. This was a momentous occasion for the sector and was a hard-fought win for many organisations, including the Marine Energy Council, who had done years of campaigning for this result. The minima has been described by government as the biggest investment in a generation in tidal power and is likely to bolster investor confidence. Also in AR4, floating offshore wind was allocated £24 million, a significant boost to the sector so soon after the Celtic Sea announcement. Wave projects can also be supported within AR4, with access to £31 million shared across a number of technologies. It's now also been announced that the UK government will hold annual CFD rounds in a welcome move towards building a resilient energy system powered by renewables and protecting consumers against rising bills. This is something that Regen has been calling for a while to provide much clearer long-term strategy for renewable energy deployment. Annual CFDs will send a positive signal to developers, allow developers to build their project portfolios, utilities to invest in grid infrastructure, and supply chain companies to build the job skills and capabilities needed to deliver net zero in an efficient way. With many tidal developers passing eligibility checks in AR4 and AR5 likely to be awarded in 2023, the next few leasing rounds could be crucial in supporting wave and tidal technologies to commercialisation. And I've only really scratched the surface here in talking about marine energy policy. As we've covered today already, the whole energy landscape has changed in the last 6 months. From crazy price rises, concerns over energy security, and multiple energy companies unfortunately collapsing, it has been a difficult time for everyone in the sector, but the importance of achieving a net zero energy system has never been more important. Determining whether COP was a success is a difficult question to answer. But at this point, with COP27 happening this November and annual COP conferences from then onwards, it no longer seems like the right question. And instead, I think we're all asking ourselves how we can ensure what happens next for our sector is a success. While there have been lots of announcements during and post-COP, what is currently lacking is a joined-up, holistic approach to marine renewable energy policy and energy policy more widely. This is crucial to ensure that these policies are implemented, projects are successfully delivered, and a real step towards net zero emissions is made. This requires strategic coordination of policy to support all marine technologies in the transition to net zero, and to recognise the 2020s as a time for innovation, not competition. Having a clear direction through a programme of marine policies should acknowledge and appreciate the need for all of these technologies to work together to support a net zero energy system. And with so many amazing organisations and people in the room and at the conference today, there's no better place to start than here. But if you thought you were busy over the last few years, I think it means that we're about to be a lot busier. So I look forward to discussing some of this and looking at what's next for marine policy with my panel members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. And I should have mentioned at the start as well, if you have any questions for the panellists, do submit them over Slido. But we're now going to turn to Max to give the view from Bays of quite a turbulent time.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Max Muir. I am a lapsed academic and policy official at Bays. So I lead the department's ocean energy team, which encompasses tidal range, tidal stream, wave and OTEC. I also work a little bit on the floating offshore wind side with a focus on infrastructure investment strategy. I was going to say that this is the largest number of people that I've seen under one roof for more than 2 years, but I think that the lunch rush has deprived me of that sort of tidbit. Although if I take an expansive view of roof, then it still holds true. But anyway, thank you to Marine Energy Wales for making this happen. Thank you to Richard for stepping into chair at such short notice. And thank you to Grace for that very insightful presentation. So I'm kind of somewhat conscious that I've got the admittedly welcome conundrum of having a broad brief of technologies, but only a limited time to speak. So in view of the stimulating panel that we had this morning on tidal range and in view of the sort of floating offshore wind focus for tomorrow, I'm proposing to sort of narrow my remarks mainly to tidal stream and wave for this session right now. So if we dive straight in, has the post-COP26 policy landscape delivered for marine energy technologies? Again, without recapitulating too much, we had the 20 million ring fence announcement in November last year, and while it's neither wise nor proper to try to anticipate the results of a competitive and commercially sensitive auction, I think it's safe to say that gives tidal stream developers a really good opportunity to kick on and demonstrate the viability and scalability of their designs. We also saw just last month that future CFD rounds will be going forward on an annual basis henceforth. I think that this will provide emerging technologies, including or perhaps especially tidal stream, with a more stable and sort of consistent and reliable platform to kick off from. And it's also worth noting that wave energy technology continues to be eligible for a variety of both governmental funding and independent funding via UKRI. So on the government side, there's the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund, which I think in its last funding round funded some wave innovation projects. They're about to open their 9th round. There's budget, and who's to say wave technologies may well win again. And then there's the net zero innovation portfolio itself, which makes sort of larger grants, but wave is very much one of the technologies eligible for that. So overall then, and perhaps predictively for someone speaking on behalf of Her Majesty's Government, I think that the post-COP period has seen quite a bit of concrete action aimed at realising the promise of our marine energy technologies. But I also wonder, and sort of without taking the title of this session too literally, whether the question of COP26 delivering for the marine energy sector is quite the right question, and indeed whether we sort of maybe ought to flip it round. And I think this is sort of where Grace was going with her last slide in her presentation. And I think this is a good question, is basically what could the marine energy sector offer the net zero effort? So it's a sort of JFK, ask not, you know, you know how it goes. So anyway, to me that feels like the burning issue, and it's certainly the most important question from the policy making point of view. And so what I mean by that is basically that we focus quite a lot on the nitty-gritty, so like survivability of turbines, load factors, strike prices, pot sizes. that sort of thing, sort of almost before we have an answer to the much larger question, which to put it sort of crudely is, what is tidal stream selling? So if we've got a kind of notional spectrum of low carbon generation where wind and solar sit somewhere at the lower end of that spectrum, nuclear sits somewhere at the higher end of that spectrum, and tidal stream comes somewhere in the middle or maybe to the top end of that range, how are we supposed to contextualise that in the context of the energy mix itself? And I don't want that to sound too pessimistic, because I agree that we've had quite remarkable cost reductions to date, and there's no reason to think that those cost reductions couldn't sort of plummet even further. But wherever that cost ends up, we do need to have some kind of way of contextualising it, and some way of understanding the role of tidal stream in a complex, integrated net zero energy system. So there's certain ways that tidal stream could work in that system. You could think that you could deploy it sort of as a form of insurance, where if other presently cheaper technologies, for whatever reason, don't deploy at their sort of target ranges or feasible maximums, or whatever, tidal stream is there to provide those extra gigawatts to take up the slack. So that's one kind of view you could take. The other kind of view you could take is that actually, even if all technologies, and this is I think what Arna in the tidal range session earlier this morning was getting at, even if you have every technology deploying at or near its feasible maximum, we still might need a few extra gigawatts from somewhere. And tidal stream could claim to be those extra gigawatts that get you over the line to a net zero consistent power sector. And then the third option, and this is the one that I think industry is kind of keen to push, is that the kind of power that tidal stream gives you is a kind of power that you can't easily get from the other cheaper forms of renewable energy, namely a predictable and reliable power supply that might bring down system balancing costs, or essentially reduce the volume of backup plant that you need to have on the system to counter the intermittency of these other renewables. Now, these kind of views are not mutually exclusive, and they're all compelling sort of each in their own way, and I won't pretend to have a clear answer right now as to which of those is the view that we should as a sector adopt. I think the takeaway is just that you, the sector, and we, the government, need to do some thinking on this kind of fundamental question of what the role of tidal stream is. Especially now that recent events have made the notion of energy security and the sort of international dependencies in the energy system a much more salient issue. It's more important than ever, but also perhaps easier than ever for renewable technologies, including tidal stream, to articulate what their uniquely compelling proposition is. So that's my kind of snapshot view of the state of the field. I mean, if the question is what can marine energy do for us, my suspicion is probably quite a lot. But we do need to have that clear view of what role we think it will play, because if you don't know where you're trying to get to, it's difficult to figure out how to get there. So I think that's about it from me.
Excellent, thank you, Max. And yeah, I think the Climate Change Committee forecast that electricity demand is going to treble by 2050, and so the government approach of lots of everything seems to be the right thing, and hopefully marine will be part of that. Eileen, EMEC has been at the forefront of lots of the positive developments in the marine energy sector. Can you give your view on where we are at the moment?
Absolutely, yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Eileen Linklater, External Relationship Manager at EMEC. EMEC is the European Marine Energy Centre. We are coming up for our 20th anniversary next year, and we're the world's first and only accredited test laboratory for wave and tidal testing. In our time, we've tested 34 different devices from 21 different companies from 11 different countries. I've been at EMEC for 12 years, and I can tell you I have seen some things. Our whole purpose is to do real sea testing, to prove performance in real conditions, to get a proper, thorough understanding of how these things work. And we can also give accredited performance assessment to prove to investors how they work as well, which is obviously critically important. We've been on an interesting journey insofar as we discovered very quickly within the Orkney context, where EMEC's based, that wave and tidal technologies do not exist in a vacuum. There are particular grid constraints in Orkney, which led us down an interesting path around using hydrogen production as a form of energy storage, which has led us to pioneer a green hydrogen economy in Orkney, and we're now doing lots of work around renewables integration and decarbonising maritime and aviation uses as well. So it's really grown arms and legs. In terms of today's question, there are two kind of perspectives on this I think that we're all touching on. There's the domestic angle in terms of what can we bring in terms of security of supply, which is the buzz at the moment. But there's a very powerful argument here around job creation, economic impact, and that whole notion of exactly what Max said around tidal being predictable, flexible, good for balancing. So I'm going to put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that because I also wanted to touch on the COP26 theme. And in terms of marine energy, the UK is truly world leading, and that huge market that Richard mentioned, 76 billion global market, really is ours to lose as it stands. And so we need to be really canny in terms of what we do next and make sure that the benefits of the sector are impactful and sticky in the regions, in the coastal regions of the UK. Our interaction with the COP summit was actually more focused on that concept of global island and coastal communities and what wave and tidal energy can bring there. And it's really interesting when we look at giving small islands and fragile coasts a different resource and as a result more power and more autonomy over their own resources. And we can really shift the perspective from islands being vulnerable and fragile to being adaptable and strategically located. That can really create powerful new energy futures for small communities and democratisation of access as well in some regions of the world. So really important. More resilience and greater community ownership as well. So it's quite an exciting prospect. When we talk about small islands developing states, I quite like, I read somewhere a reframing of that, which is large ocean states. And Scotland's a perfect example of that. I'm going to wear a Scottish hat on this panel today and say that, you know, Scotland's maritime resources are 6 times the size of our land. So, you know, there's a vast potential there, and that's true of many islands and coasts globally. So how do we make sure this can have a global value? Well, we need to make the technology more affordable, accessible, really build on those local economic impacts. But also more knowledge sharing, collaboration. There's a lot of replication work that can go on. At EMEC we set up an international waters group, which is International Wave and Tidal Energy Research Sites. And the whole idea there is to build a global market more quickly by avoiding duplication of effort, by sharing research and standards development to make sure that the environment is as favourable as possible for companies to export into the future. Coming back to the local, I mean, that's all great, the global exciting potential, but we need to have a domestic market first. And that's really where we are right now, and need to pay that attention. We can share some examples to support, you know, what is the case for tidal. So a really important one, I think, is that economic impact in island and coastal communities all around the British Isles. We did an economic impact assessment of the work EMEC has done since 2003, and it showed that from an investment of 36 million into building the EMEC facilities, we generated a return to the UK economy of 306 million GVA. 230 million of that in Scotland and over 100 million of that in the Orkney Islands. So even the R&D work is absolutely valuable. The other aspect is the greater local content potential in wave and tidal projects. Again, really important. You'll hear from Orbital Marine Power tomorrow, but you know, they can show 80% local content in the turbine that's currently being tested at EMEC. When that machine was built in Dundee, it was the first thing to leave a shipyard in 40 years. That's a really powerful signal to industry as well in places where it's really badly needed. But it's not just about, you know, local content either, it's inward investment. So on our tidal site also we have Magallanes testing their turbine, and that's a Spanish company who chose to come and open an office in Scotland because this is the place to be. It's absolutely the place to be to prove your technology. And then if we look at balancing renewables, we've taken a journey around hydrogen production, battery storage, and we're right in the midst right now of installing some flow cell batteries as well. So we've been looking at integrating electricity generated on our tidal site and also a community wind turbine, and how that can all integrate together within the island context, which is really interesting and exciting. Orkney's really kind of like Britain in microcosm in many ways, so there's a lot that can be learnt from some of the projects that we do. The other thing I wanted to lastly mention is just the notion of diversity of markets. And as an example here, I would use the Wave Energy Scotland funded project Motion. They've been testing at our wave test site and in a small scale, but their next step is to use that technology to demonstrate autonomous power to power offshore applications in the North Sea. So it's part of that whole decarbonisation journey that the oil and gas sector has to go through as well. So overall, it's absolutely great that the CFD programme now can accommodate marine energy again. That's a hard-fought case, and I really have to congratulate everybody who put their shoulder behind that. And it really was coordinated, consistent effort from the industry that saw that being realised. And I would like to see more of that. I think it's really powerful, and for the first time in a long time, and I've been doing this for a long time, I feel like we are coming together and being more consistent and clear in terms of what we can offer and how we can do that. But I think the revenue incentive alone isn't enough. I do think we need a wider programme of support, like we see in other sectors. You could take wind development as an example, offshore wind and floating offshore wind right now as an example. We need that wider programme of support because there's a big list of other issues we need to tackle to make sure that the industry really does benefit the UK.
Excellent.
I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And there's some really exciting developments in Wales, including the announcement this morning. So, Jim, can you give the view from here?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And like everybody else, it's great to be in that last face-to-face session like this. So it's really good to be here. So thank you to MEW for the opportunity. My name's Jim Scopes. I work for an organisation called Local Partnerships. And those of you who don't know us, we are a publicly owned, I always think of us as a publicly owned management consultancy, so partly owned by Treasury, but also by Welsh Government and the Local Government Association. And we only provide expertise and services back to the public sector. So it's the only sector in which we work. And at the moment, I'm supporting Jasper, who you met this morning, Jasper Roberts, on the Marine Energy Programme for Welsh Government. And in particular, leading on two of the projects there, one on revenue support for tidal stream and wave, and one around ports for offshore wind, particularly floating, but also fixed offshore wind. So a little bit more about those in a moment. On reflecting on what to say at this session, I kind of cast my mind back and thought I'd step back a little because when I started on this work, all virtual, first time I've met lots of you today, 15 months ago, I actually started trying to take a systemic view of what the marine energy sector looked like. What were the different elements? How did they have to work together in order to deliver the ambition, which is, yes, about green energy, but also about, and we heard Lee Walters talk about it earlier, maximising the benefits to Wales of marine energy. So if you look at the sector as a whole, how does the system work in order to deliver that? And it's partly to identify the kind of bottlenecks and obstacles which might need to be addressed and where there might be a role for government, Welsh Government, included in trying to address some of those obstacles. And I think as a direct result of that, we've spawned, if you like, the two projects that I'm leading now, so the revenue support one and the ports project. I'll perhaps return to that systems view just at the end of my bit, because I still think it holds good in terms of trying to understand how do you make the system as a whole work smoothly in order to deliver the maximum that it can. But coming back on topic, I think there's quite a lot of reinforcement because I think there have been some very positive announcements since COP26. And I think the key for me, taking a very parochial perspective for the Marine Energy Programme and my two projects, is The ring fence in AR4, very welcome around tidal stream. I think the annual auction round is also great, and hopefully, I'll come on to this in a moment, but that will be also have a ring fence, but a plea for policy colleagues in future. Also, more on the floating offshore wind side, I think the Crown Estates announcement of 4 gigawatts as a target by 2035 in the Celtic Sea is great. I think that begins to develop some of that, or allow the pipeline to develop. And also the 160 million, which you haven't heard too much about today, announced by BEIS as support for ports infrastructure, specifically for floating offshore wind, and specifically for Wales and Scotland, which is a very positive and a helpful announcement as well. It's probably worth addressing a question before you get the chance to ask it, is given those announcements, is there still a role for a Welsh government-supported revenue support scheme? I believe there is. I believe all that we've heard, and not just what's happening at COP26 and climate change, but everything we've heard about Ukraine and the dreadful things that are happening there, means that we need to get and accelerate this change so that we can shape it in the way that Lee Walters talked about earlier today. So I think it's an opportunity to bring a new industry into being in Wales and to become a true global leader in tidal stream in Wales. And coming back to what Max said, I think that USP, I think share his sort of tentative view that it's the predictability of that energy. I always call it the kitchen sink argument. We're going to need all of this, all the different energy sources, if we're going to really tackle climate change. So I think there's definitely a role for tidal stream within all of that. So lastly, just returning to that systems theme, any of you who have done any work on systems will know that you deal with some bottleneck on a system, but that just means the bottleneck moves somewhere else in the system. So perhaps 3 thoughts for key areas looking forward, because if we're going to accelerate these, we need to get ahead of the game and start to address some of these as early as we can. So 3 points. One is around pipeline. So we've started to see that pipeline development. How do we continue that? I think the continuing ring fence for things like tidal stream around those annual auction rounds could be really helpful. 2035 at 4 gigawatts in the Celtic Sea is great. Where next after that? When there's a realisable energy estimated around 50 gigawatts in UK waters in Celtic Sea. So what are the targets beyond that so we can get the big boys in and starting to develop those projects? So pipelines, first one. Second one we've heard a little more around here, and I'm with Eileen on this, is that how do we unlock the supply chain? So if this is going to be an opportunity to build new industries and bring jobs to Wales and to the UK, how do we unlock that supply chain and encourage developers and the other ancillary manufacturers in order to be able to help really develop that supply chain? You'll hear more about it tomorrow, but floating offshore wind, the sheer scale of and the tonnage of steel that you're going to need to be able to produce is mind-boggling, frankly. So how are we going to get ahead of the game and actually stimulate the supply chain? So the second is the supply chain, and the third, I've noticed, is subject of a number of questions, and this is in no way a criticism of colleagues dealing in these areas, but I just think if we're looking forward now for acceleration, the sheer volume of projects and changes that are coming are going to put huge pressure on consenting and on planning. We've got massive projects coming at the Celtic Sea area that will need to be consented. We've got changes to infrastructure at ports which will need harbour revision orders and, again, consenting around all of that. But I think there's a new area which we just need to make sure we don't miss, which is that all of the consents that have been granted now need to be monitored. And hopefully the acceleration of the ramp-up of that energy release can also be realised, but that will involve, again, it's another volume consideration. So my third area looking forward at that systems map, I think, is consenting and planning. And that's me. Thanks, Richard.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. And there are lots of questions coming in about consenting. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for the panellists, do post them on the Slido. And that neatly segues us to Jessica, talking about some of the consenting challenges from the Crown Estate.
Thank you. Diolch. Diolch I pawb, pnawn da pawb. Diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyfle I bod yma heddiw. Dwi'n wrth fy modd I bod yma a gael cyfle I siarad efo bobl in person. Thanks everyone, really delighted to be here and really welcoming of the opportunity to be here and actually see people in person and discuss things in person. It's really exciting. So yeah, I'm Jess Campbell. I come from the Crown Estate. I sit in the marine portfolio there. We're a really unique business with a really diverse portfolio, marine being an integral part of it. We manage the seabed around Wales, England and Northern Ireland to unlock value and deliver sustainable development in line with our values to create lasting prosperity for the nation. We unlock value through collaboration, working with customers and stakeholders to understand the challenges and investing in actions to overcome and manage them. And we're delivering on net zero goals. We applaud and support Welsh governments and wider UK government ambitions for net zero. And as managers of the seabed, we're working to advance technology to support that sustainable growth. And as a business ourselves, we've committed to becoming a net zero business by 2030 and climate positive thereafter. So really setting ourselves a bit of a challenge there. Thinking about the title of this panel, COP26 and all the policy announcements and great work around that have been really important in setting and driving the agenda, but I think the onus is on us all now to collaborate to actually deliver on those ambitions on the ground. At the Crown Estate, we're supporting on a number of fronts, so we're supporting the delivery of the ambitions for fixed offshore wind, getting ourselves towards that 40 gigawatts by 2030. Our announcements around floating wind in the Celtic Sea have been touched on a number of times, and I won't dwell on that because a colleague of mine, Tim, is speaking on that tomorrow, so don't want to steal his thunder. But we're also, with the wave and tidal sector, working with our customers to understand those challenges and those all-important evidence gaps and consenting and development risks that there's an opportunity to collaborate on and overcome. I talk about unlocking a lot, and I think this plays to what my role specifically in the Crown Estate is. So my job title is Strategic Consents Manager. So I very much, working with colleagues across Marine, I've got a role to sort of recognise those challenges and those development risks and look for opportunities to actually invest in actions to overcome those. Some of that plays to our data and digital position, so making best value of our customers and other data sets out there, really interrogating it, understanding what it means for future development, how we can make best use of that evidence and deal with residual uncertainty. But a lot of it also needs to come from that external collaboration, so working with the policymaker, the policymakers, the regulators, the decision makers, the stakeholders to understand what those challenges are and ultimately work to deliver on our really ambitious but applaudable targets in a way that ensures the integrity of our really valuable ecosystems and natural resources, but in a way that gives us that security of energy supply that delivers those economic benefits to those communities that are host to these developments. I think infrastructure and the supply chain, really important piece of the puzzle, which is sometimes overlooked, especially in the focus of my day-to-day work. I'm very much all around those consenting and development risks, and others in our marine department at the Crown Estate are better placed to advise on and work on those challenges and opportunities around infrastructure. But we absolutely recognise it's an important piece of the story, and I think just to try and wrap up before we get into the discussion part of this panel, I think following COP26 and all the really positive movements that we've seen since then, current world events and a really rapidly evolving policy environment and rapidly changing ambitions in terms of energy capacity and targets for different sectors, I think there's a real task at hand for us all to recognise the role that as individual organisations, as industry, as regulators, as funny organisations like ourselves that kind of sit in between, you know, we've all got a part to play, we're all trying to get to the same place, and I think it's about harnessing the fantastic momentum that we've gathered to date and really accelerating that growth and development.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your questions. There was a report by the National Infrastructure Commission recently which sort of highlighted the gap between the government's ambition on net zero and the necessary actions to sort of getting there. So I'll tie that in with the most popular question and put it to you, Grace, about whether there's a risk that policy support, without necessary policy support, the industry could accelerate elsewhere.
Yes, I think that's true, and I think it is twofold. You'll get developers looking elsewhere if they're not supported within, you know, the UK, but you'll also have the supply chain looking elsewhere. So even if it, you know, we continue with the UK-based sites, we're talking about the Celtic Sea, floating offshore wind. At the end of the day, even if a developer wants to support local content and local supply chains, if it's affecting their margins and then not being able to make it financially viable, they are going to have to look elsewhere to where it is cheaper or more efficient. And that's where we do need the policy support. You know, we have a really well-established supply chain in this country, and we've got the companies that can do it. They just need that support to be able to deliver at scale. And this is something where thinking about this kind of strategic approach that we've talked about and the infrastructure approach, we need it to be stepped up. And I think the Crown Estate agrees with that we need to go through the phases of this. We can't jump from where we are now to deploying 1 gigawatt farms. The supply chain in the UK won't be able to deal with that. International supply chains might, but then we lose that UK content. So yes, I think it is crucial that we put the policy support to that. That's where the, you know, AR4 pots have been really helpful, and that ring fence funding has been helpful. But we need to continue that to make sure we're capturing different marine technologies at different stages of their developments, and to continue to support them throughout the next few years.
Thank you. And Eileen, since the AR4 announcement, have you seen an upsurge in interest, international companies contacting EMEC?
We have actually, yeah. So that's immediately interesting. You know, people do respond to positive policy signals. And yeah, I would say in terms of that international dimension, you know, it's not a false threat to say that there are other countries who are really putting resources into this. The US in particular, the DOE have through their water power programme, China, it's on their 5-year plan, and not to mention, you know, there's swathes of Europe who have, you know, great resources and we've been working with on different projects. So yeah, that threat is very real.
Yeah. And Max, there's been targets set for floating offshore wind. What do you think about a target for the marine energy sector?
I don't think we would rule it out. So I basically think the kind of question that I was getting at earlier on is we need to have an answer to that question before we start thinking about targets and stuff. Because the target you set and the time frame for it will be sensitive to what role you think the tidal stream is ultimately playing in the energy system. But it's certainly, you know, as our understanding of that potential role develops, it's something that's certainly on the table.
Excellent. And Jessica, lots of questions coming in on the slide out for you, I think. Sarah, take the third one there from Anonymous, who's posted 3. Consenting is a constraint on timeliness of tidal stream project delivery. What can be done to speed up and have fit-for-purpose process?
Yeah, so I mean, at the Crown Estate, we're not actually in charge of the consenting process, but we want to work with others to sort of address constraints and overcome uncertainties. The Minister this morning mentioned the end-to-end review that's been commissioned of the planning and consenting process as one of the outcomes of the marine renewables deep dive. I think that's really to be welcomed. I think probably there's a lot of lessons that can be learned over consenting of marine renewable energy over the years, probably opportunities for efficiencies. one of the key barriers, given where the wave and tidal stream technologies are and the sectors are, is that sort of just basic lack of data and evidence of environmental impacts. And I don't think we're doing a good enough job of learning from the developments that we have seen delivered in the UK and across the world. So at the Crown Estate, we're involved in a number of work streams, so Orgy Ocean Energy being one of them, been instrumental over the last few years in developing their forward-look documents and feeding into state of the science reports on those outstanding evidence gaps. And we haven't come as far as probably we would have liked to have come by now, but I think that's a clear marker in the sand as to areas that we need to work on. And the Morlice demo zone was mentioned this morning. I'm really pleased to sort of mention, associated with Welsh Government's support to that, the infrastructure project there. We ourselves are investing in supporting the delivery of the environmental monitoring and mitigation plan at that site, because we see that as instrumental in gathering some of that all-important data and evidence which will have wider sector benefits and allow that phased development and scaling up of the tidal stream sector. So I think there's a lot more that can be done just on addressing evidence gaps. But then the challenge is, how do we use that? How do we feed that into decision-making? How do we deal with residual uncertainty in decision-making? There's very much a policy aspect to that, and we're really keen to work with Welsh Government, with NRW, with others from across the UK on that. I think there are a number of resourcing challenges that come with that, and perhaps some of this will get picked up on in the discussion tomorrow. But we're really looking for ways that we can collaborate and add value and help overcome some of these challenges, because it's really important that we overcome some of these hurdles if we're to have a chance to actually upscale and deliver on some of the potential of these technologies.
Absolutely. And Jim, we've had a few questions about Team Wales and positioning Wales to take advantage of this growing sector. Do you have thoughts on what needs to be done to unlock that project pipeline?
Yes, and I think some of them is creating the pipeline, but it's then looking at, and I think Eileen touched on it earlier, is what are the broader interventions? So one of the things we're just beginning to turn our minds to on the Marine Energy Programme is, it sounds terribly grand, it's not nearly as grand as it sounds, but what might be the industrial master plan that sits behind this, just in terms of, so how do you get these manufacturers attracted to Wales and to the UK, and which bits are going to be most sticky and are going to be the ones that can attract the rest of the supply chain, because I think I'm just trying to understand some of that. And not trying to do a sort of old-style Soviet Union planning that isn't going to work, but at least understand how you might be able to attract those different sorts of things. I think the announcements today, I mean, I hope Morlice colleagues won't mind me saying that their successful success story, particularly over the last 4 or 5 months when they got planning consent, they got the marine licence, they've just had the WEFO funding announced. I think all of those things have upped the interest that they've had from international people coming here. So I think the industry, talking about tidal stream, I think there's a real opportunity to become a global leader, but it will go elsewhere unless we're able to capitalise on it. So.
Absolutely, and I think it's that predictability that provides such an interesting offer to the energy system. I don't know if you talk about the potential benefit that brings in terms of system security and its role in the net zero future.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about it in various different ways already, but in order to achieve net zero and in order to secure that supply and make sure that we've always got power when we need it, with the increase in demand that we're going to have as the energy system transitions, we need a diversified supply. And that's not just diversification of technologies, it's diversification of location, weather patterns, time of the day. It's being able to tap into lots of different technologies and types. So, you can see downstairs at the showcase, even within tidal stream or even within floating offshore wind, there are so many different types and so many different prototypes and systems and models that they're coming up with. And we need to be supporting all of those, because that gives us that security. But not only that, you know, that's very inward looking, that's looking at achieving our own net zero targets. But as Eileen said, we're an island, and we also have many islands around us. And many countries in the world don't have that, and they don't have the access to renewables that we have. So if we weren't harnessing all of those and harnessing the power of our oceans, we'd be doing an injustice to the world, because we wouldn't be able to be that export market and be able to support other countries to achieve net zero, as well as being like a world leader ourselves in that space. So it is really, really crucial, but it is about understanding the role of it, and not over or underestimating that, and being realistic about it and putting in the policies that are realistic to deliver it.
Absolutely. And Eileen, you touched upon that the CFD announcement wasn't enough. You have the ear of the government here. What more do you want to see from the UK government?
How long have I got? I think a really positive step, and a really potentially simple one, would be to set a target to aim for. And then various things could follow from that. Having that flag in the hill, I think, has proven to be very valuable in other sectors. We've seen that. But I think just, again, we're kind of coming back to the need for a more strategic view of things. It's just picking up on lots of common threads here. A programme board of some sort being established, I think, would be really helpful. And that could start herding some of the cats that are around, to be perfectly honest. I'm blown away by the level of activity here in Wales. I think Marine Energy Wales and you know, all the companies I've heard from today and organisations, it's just phenomenal. You know, well done Wales, because it's really impressive. But we need, you know, there's all that happening here. There's an awful lot going on in Scotland as well. And it's kind of like, how do we then get that jigsaw pulled together in a coherent, sensible way to maximise benefit and not, again, duplicate effort, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think, so there you go, target programme board would be a really good place to start, to just get our ducks in a row, as it were.
Excellent, thank you. We've had a question there from Anonymous again, about how BEIS can use some of the funding that's gone to ocean energy to support the UK's broader levelling up agenda. Obviously, it's not your department, but could you speak to the sort of role of marine energy in supporting levelling up?
I think it's very, I mean, I think it is very important. That is sort of a large part of our thinking on the floating offshore wind side. So Jim mentioned earlier the sort of investment pot of up to 160 million that we have. Sort of forefront in governmental minds is that this is a potentially massive new industry that means jobs in places that maybe haven't seen jobs for a long time. So I think there is quite a committed sort of awareness that this is not solely an energy policy issue, and it's also a sort of levelling up or industrial strategy issue. But yeah, you're right, the ways in which that play out, you know, that comes from all kinds of cross-departmental and sort of regional partnerships and all manner of that sort of thing.
Excellent, thank you. And we only have 5 minutes left, so to pose one final question to all the panellists. When we're meeting in Marine Energy Wales Conference in 2023, what's the one thing that you'd like to have seen from either government or industry to accelerate the marine energy sector?
Am I taking that first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll steal all the easy answers. I think what will be important is about having a clear direction. And that goes for all energy, all renewable energy. We have set some amazing targets and ambitions, but understanding how we build that up and how we deliver it, and how all the pieces of the jigsaw fit together, how the system supports the marine development. We had lots of questions about the consenting, how we remove those bottlenecks, how we work together, a clear direction that everyone can get behind. And as you know, Eileen said earlier, you know, the success of AR4 and getting the minima was because we gave a united front. We had one message, you know, everyone kind of came together under that, and I think that's what we need again. So that's what I'd like to see. Max?
It's sort of an odd one to ask what I want to see from the government.
or from industry.
So from industry, but this time next year, I think just sort of continued progress on bringing costs down. Like I'm not going to put a number on that or a level on that, but clear, demonstrable evidence that costs are coming down, load factors are good, survivability is good, and that this is a sort of credible, increasingly mature technology. In other words, that it successfully sort of transitioned out of the R&D innovation space into this is a known quantity. I think that would be great to see. And we may well see it. I mean, that might end up being not much of an ask by this time next year. On the government side, I think we are doing quite a lot of internal modelling and analysis on this question of how does tidal stream fit into a future energy system. So I'd like to think that by this time next year, if not sooner, we will have a proper sort of quantified notion of, as one of the questions on the screen suggested, what the premium is that you might be prepared to pay for tidal stream. Because those are really the keys. Basically, credibility of the technology plus a clear vision of what role it can play. It's once you've got that, that's when you start getting to targets and sort of development partnerships and sort of coordinated planning.
Excellent.
That's actually set what I was going to say up nicely, insofar as the need to demonstrate cost reduction and to push technology towards commercialisation is really critical at this point in time. And I am not sure that everybody's quite woken up to how reliant we have been on European funding to do that job. The post-Brexit R&D funding landscape is a bit worrying from where I sit in terms of the number of projects we're involved with, supported by schemes like Interreg, which we'll no longer participate in, and the fact that the proposed replacement funding doesn't do anything like the same kind of a job in dealing with big missions like net zero. And I think the story's the same in Wales. From what I've heard, there's a lot of ERDF funding that has supported the initiatives so far. So can we see some more targeted innovation support focused on things like cost reduction and understanding tidal in the energy system?
Absolutely. Jim?
I think I might try and segue from what you talked about in terms of mission. I'm very struck by a book I read called Mission Economy, talking about the moon mission. But it is a mission. If we're going to get to net zero, if we're really going to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, it's something that we all have to get behind. So if we're here in 2023, coming back to that question, I hope we'll have the same breadth of representatives at conferences like this who are still collaborating in order to deliver this, because I don't think we can do this alone. And is there a role for government in stimulating collaboration? Almost certainly yes. We need to do that in a way which doesn't fall foul of WTO and other competition rules, but I think there are ways in which we should try to encourage that collaboration so we can deliver the mission.
And last but not least.
Last but not least, with literally seconds left.
Ignore that.
So, coming back to the idea of a strategic programme, I personally would really like to see efforts made to put in place a strategic programme to address outstanding evidence gaps and plug those all-important research needs, similar to what we've been able to establish with our offshore wind evidence and change programme. We've partnered with BEIS and DEFRA, involved more than 20 other organisations, including Natural Resources Wales and Welsh Government, in delivering that. That's providing a fantastic opportunity to address evidence gaps in a really targeted way at a scale we haven't been able to do before now, and I think that's what's needed for this sector. And I think it will have to go hand in hand with what we see coming out of that end-to-end planning and consenting review. And I think we also need to make sure that those bodies who are responsible for making the decisions, for providing that technical advice, particularly in that pre-application stage that Kerry spoke to earlier with the tidal range, actually having the resources and the capacity to be proactive around some of these issues and gather that evidence before we're dealing with live applications. I'd like to see efforts made to address some of those, because it all needs to happen if we're to have a fighting chance.
Excellent, thank you very much. So the last thing to do is just everyone show appreciation to this fantastic panel.